and the left have always hated the idea of England. The word England was almost a forbidden word. He said that English nationalism was the worst form of all nationalisms. Surely the English ought to be having our own parliament if the Scots and Welsh are going to have theirs.
Hi everybody and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest, first time on the channel, the gentleman you may have heard of, especially if you're on X, and it's Robin Tilbrook. How you doing, Robin?
Hello, Nick. Thank you for having me on.
You're more than welcome. We chatted once on the Pulse Radio when that was still going, but that's been closed down now. What I want to talk about, and you're the right person for this conversation, because first of all, you're a solicitor, and secondly, you're the chairman of the English Democrats, which is a small political party in the UK. And the question I want to explore is this: are the English beginning to waken up? Are they beginning to roar? Are they beginning to say, what the hell is going on in my country? Because, you know, obviously our country is the United Kingdom, which is then split into 4 countries. The English have their own country as well. But over my lifetime, tell me if I'm wrong, over my lifetime, it seems like the English always get the poor end of any deal, any settlement. We've got this, you know, the Scottish, you know, and the Welsh, the Irish, all of a formula about how much money they get. Most of the money is created in the southeast of England. You know, the Scottish have had referendums about staying in the Union, I believe. So of the other areas of the UK, the English never spoken to. And the thing that annoys me is MPs from different part of the Union have a say on English-only laws, where we never have a say and can't have a say on their areas only laws. And I think it's been winding people up since the Scottish referendum, when we realised there was a significant amount of people in Scotland who hated us, not just wanted to leave the Union, but there was don't know how big it is, but it was a significant amount of people who seemed to hate the English. And then this year, with the migrant hotels, the raise the colours, it looks as if the English are finally waking up and going, what about us? Is that just hyperbolic? Am I making it up? What do you think, Robin?
I think that's a great question, Nick, and thank you very much for having me on to answer it. So I certainly felt the same as you have. Back when we had the Scottish and Welsh referendum, when Blair was first elected, you know, I thought, why on earth aren't we having something for England? And I hadn't really sort of got involved in the politics of it at that point. And I thought, surely the English ought to be having our own parliament if the Scots and Welsh are going to have theirs, and their own first ministers and governments. And so I started sort of inquiring, and I joined the campaign for an English Parliament. But what I then found was that, and you know, the campaign for English Parliament found this as well, was that although lots of the senior politicians at the time would say that they thought we got a good point, they were not prepared to do anything about it because they didn't want to do anything about it. And for instance, Norman Tebbit said that we shouldn't even talk about England because it would undermine the union, and the union was the important thing. And that wasn't a good answer as far as I was concerned. And I thought that actually when we got to a point where we've spoken to senior decision makers and then been told that they're not interested, the only way of making them interested would be to have a bit more of a cutting edge with a political party. So we went through a process of talking to lots of groups who were interested in the English question, and launched the English Democrats in August 2002. And we've been campaigning about many of the points that you were making ever since. We initially campaigned for an English Parliament, First Minister and government with at least the same powers as the Scottish ones within federal UK. we were then told by senior political figures uh, that they didn't think England should have its own parliament because England's too big was the cry, which to my way of thinking, that's pretty absurd. What about France? You might say. The idea that the oldest nation state on earth, the English and England, united in 927 AD, that we shouldn't have our own parliament when Scotland and Wales had got their own parliaments, and you've got Gordon Brown going around talking about the nations and regions of Britain, and one of the nations he was talking about was Northern Ireland, which is faintly absurd. The idea that that's a nation, I mean, people always used to talk about it as the province, but for him to talk about it as a nation, I think is another Brownism, really, isn't it? Rather like selling the gold, all our gold at the rock bottom price. But that's what he was doing. And we also had quite a lot of people, senior people in politics, saying nasty things like William Hague, when he was leader of the Conservatives, he said that English nationalism was the worst form of all nationalisms. On a recorded BBC program.
That doesn't surprise me from any Tories saying that. We've seen 14 years of Tories. That doesn't shock me at all.
No, but I didn't realise in getting involved in the first place that not only were the Tories very much implicated in trying to destroy England, actually as a concept. They were very much involved in regionalisation, to break England up into regions, I suppose the sort of clue as to what that was all about was rather given away by Charles Kennedy, who was then the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He said that he supported regionalisation in England because, he said, it was calling into question the idea of England itself. So that's the agenda for England, and partly because of that, and also these ridiculous arguments that we were faced with about England, we've come to the conclusion that actually, with the British establishment the way it is, both multiculturalist and anti-English, that they represent a threat to the very idea of England, and consequently, we moved to calling for English independence, and that's what we campaign for at the moment. I mean, we after all have got a large Scottish National Party dedicated to independence for Scotland, and a fairly large Welsh Nationalist Party. The curiosity about Celtic nationalist parties, though, is that they all seem to be, in many ways, far left rather than in any way just patriotic. But it's quite strange. I mean, I remember Nicola Sturgeon when she was not only leader of the SNP, but the First Minister of Scotland. She was interviewed on one occasion, and she said she was embarrassed that her party's got the word national in its name, and also on a debate, leadership debate for Scottish leaders. She was asked what her vision for Scotland was, and she said her vision for Scotland was an independent, internationalist country within the EU, which obviously is a
oxymoron in itself,
incoherent load of nonsense. But I think it tells you that the Scottish National Party is actually, they want to get rid of the Scottish nation.
Of course, and this is why
that's weird.
Yeah, but this is why they attack England. This is why they wanted to break England up, because England is the reason why we left the EU. England is the reason why we didn't embrace the European Union and sign up to all the treaties and be a fantastic member like France and Germany. It was always the English nation going, no, we're better than them, and that's going to fail. So if you wanted to be a European, you had to get rid of England first, and that's, I think, is a lot of why the National Scotlanders, the Scot Nats, some of the Welsh, and again the Tories. Most Tories wanted to be part of the EU, hence why they had to destroy England. Now, when it comes to England being an independent nation or not, I'm on the fence. I would have to give a lot of thought. I would have to do a lot more reading. I could be won over either way. But if the status quo stays and we stay in the union and the union still exists, the minimum should be every part of the UK is treated equally. Because if you don't treat certain people, certain areas equally, it builds resentment over time. And that's what we're seeing now within England, is that resentment coming to the fore. People going, why are the English the only people who pay for prescriptions when the Welsh, Northern Irish and Scottish all get free prescriptions? Why are Welsh kids being able to go to university for free? And the answer to all these is because the southwest of England are paying all the bills. I'm in the north of England. We don't contribute that much compared to the southeast of England, London in the southeast. But it's still my country. It's still England. But when the English are seeing the perks everybody else are getting, it's definitely building resentment.
Well, I think you're right. We've over the years now have distributed, I think, fair to say, at least 60 million leaflets. And obviously, in those leaflets, we've been raising the type of points that you've been making there. I would just like to say before we move off from what the agenda is about breaking up England, is that actually Karl Marx himself was not keen on England and the English. He after the year of revolutions in 1848, he complained that.
Can I stop you there, Robin? Oh, all right. No, something was going crazy with your picture. It was like strobing, but it's all stopped now. So sorry. Carry on.
Doing it again.
No, it seems fine now.
There's nothing going on with the light here.
Right. Yeah, it was just strobing. It
must be in the system. Maybe it was the mention of Karl Marx. What did it? So yeah, Karl Marx was complaining after the year of revolutions. He said, all the revolutions of Europe are wrecked on the rock of England. And the left have always hated the idea of England. England is, and the English nation is, the oldest nation on earth. Consequently, we as English people, when we look around the world, we tend to think in terms of nations and national identities and things like that. Whereas if you were from one of the newer nations, you might not think that kind of way. So, I mean, after all, most of the nations of Europe in their present form came into existence in the 19th century. And so Italy, for example, is 1863. That's the unification of Italy. Before that happened, one of the leading commentators in Europe, Count Metternich, said that Italy isn't politics, it's geography. Because there were historic states that had went back to the Middle Ages, and people didn't necessarily think in terms of being Italian, and there are after all a number of sort of Italian style languages, and Italian itself is more or less artificial creation to try and unify the country. But the English is not like that.
Yeah, we can see this across mainland Europe. There's parts of France that used to be German, and suddenly they're French, then the German again. Belgium was completely created to keep France and Germany away from each other. And it isn't like this island nation of ours, where you say it's over 1,000 years history of a place called England. It's not the same in Europe. And if these communists, these globalists want to create their utopia, then the first thing they need to do is get rid of nation states. And the reason why they attack England is because this is the most successful nation state ever to exist. The world owes a huge thank you for everything we've done for the world. It's easy to not necessarily want nation states if you live in the old Yugoslavia and you've seen the conflict, you've seen the politicization, you've seen the balkanization of your country. But if you're comparing that to England, hence why they don't want to compare it to England. Now, the people of England have been quiet all my life until this year. This year, something's happened this year. It may have started at Southport last year with the atrocious murder of those three little girls, but it seems to have come to the fore this year. We've had the English protesting outside migrant hotels because some of those migrants are rapists and pedos and perverts and criminals and murderers, and they've started doing that. And then suddenly we got raise the colours. People putting the English St. George flag everywhere, as well as Union flag as well. And it just seems like the English are waking up and are going, my country's failing. We're dying. And if I don't do something, the question I ask everybody all the time, especially globalists, if England dies, where do the English go? Because if you're a third generation immigrant here, you might go, oh, I'll just go back to Pakistan. I might go to Bangladesh. I might go to Nigeria. My mum was born in Nigeria. I'll go there. But if you're born and bred here for 1,000 years, where do the English go? We haven't got a bolt hole country we can run to because we're English. This is our soil. This is our nation. This is our country. And I think the average person on the street now is waking up. That's how I feel. What do you think is happening with the English people at the moment?
I think you're right. What has happened over the years of our campaigning and indeed before is that there was a sustained effort in the Second World War to propagandize the idea of Britain and Britishness. Before the Second World War, people generally used to talk about England and English, I mean, for instance, in the Indian Mutiny, that one of the sort of leading Victorian heroes, John Nicholson, he was referred to as an English officer, but in fact, he wasn't English. He was from Northern Ireland, as is now. And that was quite typical. And so, rather than talk about British and Britishness, people generally talked about England and Englishness. And during the Second World War, though, you've got Lord Reith in charge of the BBC in particular, who's Scottish, and he was determined to change that narrative and to make people think that they were British in England, and to get rid of the idea of England. And in fact, Churchill comments on this at one point. He did a speech to the Royal Society of St. George, and he commented that the word England was almost a forbidden word. And that's what we've got the legacy of, with people thinking that Britain and England are the same thing. And of course, part of the reason why you've got people putting up the Cross of St. George and the Union Jack is because people still have that legacy of thinking that England and Britain are the same thing. And in fact, A.J.P. Taylor, the famous historian, said that when he was young, people were talking about England, and now they only talked about Britain. And so, I mean, it is something that happened in the 20th century, rather like another problem that we've got, which is the two-party state, as it were, with Labour and the Conservatives. That didn't exist as a two-party system before the Second World War. So we've lived for a long time in the sort of shadow of things that happened in the Second World War. I think we're moving out of that generation now, out of that shadow. And I also think what we've put up with in England is not only the issue of English taxpayers' money being used to subsidise Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to an unfair extent. So we're at a point where, for decades now, the rich parts of Scotland get more subsidy than the poorest parts of England, and that subsidy is from English taxpayers. In fact, during the Scottish independence referendum, the Unionists were talking about the union dividend that Scotland gets. The extra amount of money is called the Barnett formula, and it's not only the Barnett formula itself, which is income and expenditure. There's also capital spending, which they call the Barnett consequentials. So one of the reasons why the Scottish National Party, to its discredit, was saying that they liked the idea of the HS2 project, because it was costing a colossal amount of money in England, and because it was costing 100 billion or so, that meant that Scotland had to be given 13 billion under the Barnett consequentials, even though they actually hadn't got a project to spend it on. So we've got a system that actively discriminates against England and the English. We've got an asymmetric multiculturalism, as Professor Kaufman calls it, where you've got the multiculturalism that basically grants rights to certain communities, but those rights are at the expense of the host nation. So we've got that, which people, I think, are realizing more and more disadvantages them. But we've also got this whole business of illegal immigration, which people have become very aware of, coupled with the Boris wave, with literally millions upon millions of people. I think the estimate something in the order of 3 million people coming in legally. All of these people being many of them being put to the front of the queue straight away. And obviously this is particularly obvious with the illegal immigrants going into 4-star hotels. When we've got literally veterans who are out on the streets, where they're cutting the heating allowance for the elderly. It doesn't. People think it doesn't make any sense, but then it starts to make sense when you realise that the British political elite loathe the idea of England. They hate the idea of the English nation. They want it gone, and they're working to try to achieve that. And it's basically for that reason that we've got this sort of toxic political structure. It's not just political; it's also academic and the media and so on. We got this toxic structure that's basically trying to do us down, and that's why we're really saying with Call for Independence that we need a reset.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a reset is coming in many ways. The people of the United Kingdom seem to have had enough of mass migration. The English have had enough of being the poor relation in this union. We've all had enough of the fact that foreigners seem to be treated better than the British. And it seems that anybody can become British, anyone can become English now. The second you step foot on this fantastic land, you're then English, Scottish, British, whatever. You can be whatever you want to be. And if that's the case, then what does it mean to be British, to be English? If someone from Nigeria can turn up and suddenly claim, I'm now English, well, it just means that the word English now means nothing. And what the word English means is you and your ancestors can trace their lineage, maybe not a full 1,000 years. There's bound to be Irish in there and a bit of Vikings in there, and maybe your great granddad married a French or German girl. All that's perfectly acceptable. But if you can trace part of your part of your genes and your ancestors for hundreds and hundreds of years in this in England, well, to me that means you're English.
Yes, I had an interesting conversation. I think probably about 6 months ago now, with somebody whose ancestors were Huguenots. In other words, they're French refugees from Catholic oppression. They're Protestant refugees. That family still thinks of itself as Huguenot, hundreds of years after they came here. So it's perfectly normal to think of yourself according to where your history of your nation comes from. Um, and the idea that we should be in any way ashamed of doing that is just ridiculous. And I think people in England did allow themselves to be sort of browbeaten into thinking that they couldn't talk out about um, our nation. And of course, part of that is that the British political establishment has been quite thorough in making sure there's almost no institutions that represent England in any way. So, for instance, if you look at the trade unions, there's a Scottish trade union congress, there's a Welsh trade union congress, there's an Irish trade union congress, and there's a British one. There isn't one for England, and that tells you quite a lot about the Labour movement's agenda.
Yeah, well, we have a minister for Scotland, we have a minister for Wales. There's no minister for England. No, this is the same narrative that rolls through everything throughout the Union. The English are ignored, forgotten about. But I reckon it's because the establishment is scared of the English. That's why they're trying to sideline us.
So some people have said, and I think with some justice, that England's the last colonial imperial possession of the British establishment and state. And it is worth bearing in mind that during the time of empire, colonial administrators did do the sort of divide and rule type of approach that multiculturalism has been applied. And they did import populations of non-Indigenous people into various colonies in order to create division. So my father was in the army. I was actually born in Malaya, and Malaya, or Malaysia as it is now, was but when it was Malaya under British rule, it had originally basically two ethnicities there. One were the Indonesian pirates, who are mostly Muslim, and they call themselves Malays. And also then there were the indigenous people in the jungle, who were quite primitive, and not exactly Stone Age, but a bit like that. So they lived in the jungle and they hunted and they were hunter gatherers in the jungle, really, rather than settled or fully settled. So the British come along, they think that they've got to deal with particularly the Malays, and so they start to import the Chinese people in large numbers to do most of the work and to contract. And of course, the Chinese and the Malays don't get on at all, which is useful because it means that the British administrators are then supposedly keeping the peace between these two rival factions. And then they've also imported Tamils to run the tea plantations and Sikhs to be the security people. So actually, multiculturalism has an imperial root to it, and it has been used on a number of occasions in the past to try and secure the powers of the British state and to give the British state a role. And I think that it's not too fanciful to say that something like that happened as far as England's concerned. The British state wanted to retain control and wanted to retain a purpose, and has used its position to create a society which is divided and which needs the state to intervene. Of course, the snag from the English point of view is not only has this been done against English interests, but then you get concepts like policing by consent. And policing by consent sounds like it's going to be good, but what it actually means is when you've got some communities that don't consent to being policed, and others that are used to the idea, like English people, it's the police tend to concentrate on those that do consent, right, and take action against them, rather than focusing on those that are actually causing the trouble in the first place. And we saw that really clearly with the reaction and the way in which police forces have dealt with the whole Pakistani Muslim child rape gangs operating in, as it turns out, at least 50 cities and towns in England, and also some in Wales and in Scotland, to be fair. But it's a phenomenon that, of course, is mostly in England, and the English have been unable to really sort of react to that, because the English reaction was, well, if something like that's happening, we should call the police. Well, and then the police, far from helping, tell them that if they raise it again, they'll be arrested.
Yeah, that definitely went on. But things are changing. Things have changed now. I don't think we're going back to where we were a couple of years ago. Robin, thanks so much for chatting to me today. Before you go, tell me a little bit about the English Democrats. And if you send me some links, I'll put them in the description of the video so people can go straight to the website and things like that. So tell us a little bit about the English Democrats.
Yes, thank you. Well, as I said, the English Democrats were founded launched in 2002. We are the only English nationalist party campaigning. We have been campaigning in the interests of the English nation, we think. And we're continuing to do so. We think that what's happening is something that vindicates our stance and shows that what we've been saying about multiculturalism, about mass immigration, and all the various other things, and the finance side, that actually the English need to stand up and fight for their own corner. Until we do so, of course, we're going to carry on getting a sort of political kicking.
Yeah, the only people who are going to fight for the English are called the English.
They are,
and that's what we need to realize. No one's going to come to our rescue, and no one's going to come and do us a favor. If we don't do it as English men and women, then no one's going to do it.
That's exactly right.
Robin, thanks so much, and let's do this again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.